calling today Sportsmanship Saturday. Why? Because America's game's going on this afternoon, Army, Navy. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about college athletics, and I have a very special guest joining us on the program right now. Normally, we don't start the show with guests. Normally, we get rolling, and then we'll bring guests in to talk about stories, but this story's taken on a life to itself. Last time we got together at this time slot, the Ohio State-Michigan game was on, and you and I watched together the melee that happened with the flag planting by the Michigan players of the Horseshoe at Ohio State. And then we talked about it for a couple hours, what happens to sportsmanship in college football and the example it sets for kids. Well, this week I was watching news coming out of the great state of Ohio, and State Representative Josh Willimas of Ohio introduced a bill called the Ohio Sportsmanship Act, which would make planting a flag at the midfield of Ohio Stadium against the law. And a lot of people saw this, and quite honestly, probably younger times in my career, I would have rolled my eyes and could have had a good chuckle about it. And I started watching people around sports react to this. Every newspaper in the country's written about it. Every sports talk show host in the country's talked about Representative Williams, but nobody actually talked to him of why he introduced this bill. So I reached out to his office, and we're bringing him on the program right now. So without further ado, it's my honor to bring on State Representative Josh Williams of Ohio, our special guest here on the Infinity Sports Network. Representative Williams, I appreciate you taking time on this Saturday to join us here across the country.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on to talk about my bill.
Well, let's do a little background for everybody. I was on the air, watched this whole thing happen, and it was a good football game. And then we saw the melee that happened afterwards, and reaction came swift from people around the country. They didn't like it, and it turned out to be a really big deal, and it started a chain reaction, because that day we saw 5 fights break out in college football games around the country. I want to know, where were you when you saw this, and what was your reaction when you saw the Donnybrook take place at the 50-yard line at the Horseshoe?
Yeah, so I was with my family and friends back in Toledo as we watched the game unfold and watched the melee that ensued. And I paid attention to the coverage that it was getting. A lot of people talked about sportsmanship and whether that was a proper way to celebrate a victory. But what was lost in that story, and what I wanted to highlight, was that one of my law enforcement officers was severely injured when he was stampeded upon by 300-pound linemen that day, while he was trying to provide safety and security to our fans and to our players. And that type of conduct just has no place in college football.
Now, when I saw the bill originally, and I've heard a lot of sports talk guys locally and nationally talk about you, and quite honestly, I don't think anybody actually tried to figure out what your intentions were with the bully pulpit you have as a state representative in Ohio. A lot of them instantly said, well, wait a minute, is this just an Ohio State-Michigan thing? Because the bill is about planting the flag in the middle of the Horseshoe, and it's the only stadium that you had on there. And then I've seen other people go, well, maybe he's a Michigan fan and he's clowning on Ohio State. Tell me about the bill and how you wrote it and why you wanted to write it.
No, so I'm a Buckeye fan through and through. I'm a season ticket holder. What we saw after that there was a $100,000 fine levied against both Ohio State and Michigan. What we didn't see was any news coverage of the after effects of an officer having to spend weeks at home recovering from a severe concussion. And then I saw the Michigan coach simulating planting a flag at the basketball game, clearly indicating that they weren't taking this serious. So this bill was introduced in the last week of what we call the General Assembly, and never had a chance of even getting a hearing, let alone getting to the floor, because that normally takes several months, even a year. It was intended to be a shot across the bow of the NCAA and the Big Ten, that they need to take these pregame and postgame unsportsmanlike conduct and penalize it more severely in order to try to prevent it in the future. And I don't believe a $100,000 fine was stiff enough, especially to a university that just spent $10 million to sign an unproven quarterback freshman. So it was simply to get the attention of the NCAA and the Big Ten that either they are going to step up as governing agencies and truly govern this type of conduct, or state legislatures like the one I represent here in Ohio will be forced to step in. Because I have to protect my law enforcement officers that are providing safety and security to our teams And to our fans, I have to provide safety to the student athletes and to our fans that actually were on the field that day. This type of conduct that can incite violence has no place in college football.
Let me take one thing off the table, and we're talking right now with State Representative Josh Willimas of Ohio. He introduced a bill that you've read about, you've heard people talk about, the O.H.I.O. Sportsmanship Act. People have said, and you live in Toledo, you represent Toledo, and that's a different place when it comes to the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, because it's right there in the middle, and that's really kind of the angst that this rivalry involves, is that little strip of Toledo, whether it really belongs to Michigan or Ohio, and that's really where the animosity in the heat comes to this rivalry. Does this have anything to do with, I've heard some people go, well, he's really a secret Michigan fan, and he's trying to clown everybody at Ohio State. I've seen Ohio State fans say, well, he's just bitter because Michigan won. Does this have anything to do with this?
No, absolutely not. Like, I love the rivalry. You know, I got tired of beating Michigan's butt every couple of years. I like that the rivalry is alive and well. Half my family's Michigan fans, half my fans Ohio State's fans. We've made the newspaper before for having big, parties with both parties present. One of my best friends, we give out a participation trophy every year to the loser. Like, I have fun with the rivalry, but this was clearly intended to be about the safety and security of our law enforcement officers, our student athletes, and our fans. But let's be clear, I did draft it in a way to catch national attention, to spotlight this type of issue. And like a nursing baby latching onto a tit, the news media latched onto the story. And I don't care if I get dragged through the mud. I have a law enforcement officer sitting at home recovering from a brain injury. And because that officer was knocked to the ground and stampeded upon, that is why pepper spray was deployed towards players to open up an area so we could get him off the ground. These are the facts of what happened that day that's being lost in the cloud of just it being a football rivalry. I mean, I had a young lady die here in Toledo when fans stormed the field and pulled down the goalpost, and she was struck in the head. Like, these are injuries that can be prevented by the NCAA and the Big Ten coming up with robust policies that either prohibit this conduct or severely penalize this conduct if teams and players participate in it. There's ways you can win and have victory and celebrate, and you can do so without causing risk of injury to our law enforcement officers, to our student athletes, and to our fans. And we saw it across the nation that day. Every time conduct like this occurred on the field, a fight broke out. Violence broke out. And at some point, we've watched for decades now, the NCAA is not responding adequately. So I simply introduced a piece of legislation that will get their attention. If they want this type of conduct to become a criminal offense in states across the country, keep ignoring your responsibilities and allowing this type of conduct to occur.
At your own peril.
At your own peril.
Imagine the response you've gotten. And I've seen everywhere. I've seen it from people clowning on you. I've seen people not paying attention to really the attention. Because I'll be honest with you. When I first saw it, I'm like, oh, boy, I can't wait to talk about that on national radio. I'm going to make fun of this all day long. And then I started thinking about it because I saw everybody else clowning on the bill, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. If everybody's in lockstep over here, I got to look more into this and why he was doing it. And I went online, and I saw some of your interviews like, wait a minute, I got to invite him to come on the program because I do want to hear what the man has to say, because I think you offered this, the more research I did, with higher intentions than what you've been getting in the national discourse. So my question is, what kind of response have you gotten? What has this done to the conversation? Because I don't know if a lot of people really understand your intentions.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't understand it. You know, sports media wants to run with it as a rivalry thing, and Ohio soft versus the Ohio-Michigan rivalry. And that's fine. It grabbed the attention of a lot of people. But as I've done interviews and explained the intent, and I got the attention from the NCAA that I wanted. If you look at the ESPN report, you will see that they actually did announce that they were going to be looking at this type of conduct moving forward and whether or not the NCAA should prohibit it. You know, ESPN gave a great quote from me in regards to the intentions of the bill, and we drafted it in a way to grab national attention. And hopefully I don't have to move forward with legislation next General Assembly. But if I do, the legislation will be more broad. It will be more wide-ranging. It will apply to both pregame and postgame unsportsmanlike conduct that causes risk of injury. That's kind of my area that I operate in. I'm an attorney. I'm the vice chair of criminal justice. I have to review every criminal statute, and when harm is caused inside of my state, we always look at whether or not our laws adequately address it, or if we need to create new criminal penalties to curb this behavior. So I'm praying, I'm hoping that the NCAA and the Big Ten come up with robust policies that are adequate to try to curb this type of behavior going forward. But a $100,000 fine is not enough to these institutions.
I thought so. I thought when they did that, it was ridiculous. It was a $100,000 fine. No players face anything for their participation in this. What about from Ohio State? What response have you gotten from the athletic department or the university?
Well, we have some meetings set up after lame duck is over. Right now, we're in the last couple of weeks of lame duck sessions, so our schedules are pretty packed. I'm sure they would have appreciated if I would have waited to introduce it, but we needed to strike while the fire was hot and get the attention that was needed towards my law enforcement officers. Look, I don't mind being ridiculed online. I don't mind being called soft. All you got to do is look at my background of going from a homeless high school dropout to being disabled to being an attorney and a professor. You can see I've overcome so much. Soft is not in my character. But what is in my character is making sure I provide for the safety and security of our law enforcement officers that serve and protect our communities. And everybody just forgot about an officer that was sitting in the hospital overnight from a head injury. And now he has to go through testing over the next couple of weeks as he's recovered. And, I've called and spoken to the FOP local president in regards to him and maintain updates on his recovery. And I hope he, makes a full recovery. But we shouldn't even be having that conversation. If this fight would have occurred 2 minutes left into the fourth quarter, we would have seen substantial suspensions. We would have seen penalties come down on these universities more heavily. But since it occurred after the whistle blew at the end of the game, we've got pretty much silence from the NCAA and a very small penalty from the Big Ten. And that's not good enough. Either they are going to step up or we will.
State Representative Josh Willimas of the great state of Ohio joining us here talking about the bill that he's introduced that I don't know a lot of people have taken seriously, called the Ohio Sportsmanship Act. Here's the thing that I wonder about, sir. Were you surprised at the either ho-hum reaction to the fight or the, hey, this is great, it's part of the rivalry, and nobody really talked about sportsmanship or what sports is supposed to be about?
Yeah, it was unfortunate. I mean, once we saw certain news outlets get a hold of it in the college football realm and change the narrative from what we wanted, it was disappointing, but that's what you risk. You never can control when you go viral. We're hoping to be able to continue with the narrative and get the attention to where it needs to be, which is towards public safety. Anytime in Ohio you assault a police officer, it's a felony. And here, just because it was in the middle of the field after a game, people don't want to have any type of responsibility for their conduct. But let's be clear. If you watch those videos, there's players from both sides that are egging it on. You can watch the Michigan player number 8 actually calling for the Ohio State players to come over while the flag is planted behind him, calling on that violence. Under our laws, that's fighting words doctrine. You're inciting violence. You're inciting a fight. You should be able to be criminally charged. We don't want to address it in that way in our state. But let's be clear, we had an injury that resulted. And next time it could be a more severe injury. We saw what happened with Detroit Pistons and Indiana Pacers. We don't want that type of violence at our games. How can we ever expect our fans to be good sportsmen in the stands when they're, one or two seats away from an opponent, a fan of the opponent, drinking alcohol, saying curse words, and we expect them not to fight in the stands. We expect them not to fight in the parking lot and have sportsmanship. We expect them when they go to their community bars not to fight and not to get into a riot, right? But their favorite players are in the center of the field throwing punches, pulling off helmets, stomping on law enforcement officers. That's not a good image for our rivalry. Our rivalry is the greatest rivalry in sports, period. It needs to be preserved, but at the same time, that has to take a second seat to the safety and security of Ohio residents and visitors to our state, including, and most importantly, our law enforcement officers.
Well, I see where it's called the Sportsmanship Act, and it really is a great juxtaposition that you and I have to have this conversation today because of the Michigan-Ohio State game. Meanwhile, in just a few hours, we'll have the Army-Navy game, which I'll disagree with you respectfully. I think the Army-Navy game is the greatest rivalry we have in college football, but I also think it's unique on the heels of your act coming up. We'll watch Army and Navy get together, and at the end of that game, the winner sings second. The loser actually has to stand there on the field singing first, which is humiliating to the team that's going to lose this afternoon at Army-Navy. Then they have to stand there and wear it when the team that beat them, that vanquished them, sings in all their glory and glee that they beat the other, and they have to stand there and watch them sing their alma mater, and not a punch is thrown. It's nothing but respect, and you look at that as the true mark of sportsmanship, in my opinion. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those institutions are teaching great character to not only their players, but everyone that has signed up to serve and enroll in those institutions. And you know, win, lose, or draw, you should have good sportsmanship in sports. And that rivalry is amazing. I can't wait to watch the game and watch those individuals that have signed up to serve our country proudly. And if they can have sportsmanship, if those institutions can teach that character to those individuals, I don't see why our other institutions, right, that are giving out scholarships, giving out millions of dollars of NIL money, can also require good sportsmanship from those players, right, that can put in good character traits in those individuals who young children look up to. We need to teach sportsmanship all the way from peewee through high school to college to professional sports, because it's getting out of control. And anytime we see these type of melees, it's a bad image, not only for the rivalry but for our country, that we allow this type of conduct to continue. And, you know, it's unfortunate that I have to continue to check on the progress of one of my law enforcement officers here in the state of Ohio because the rivalry got out of control.
You talk about the law enforcement officer that was injured. I come from a family of police officers. My dad was a cop. My brother's law enforcement. So I completely understand that. But I want to take this in just a little bit different direction. I use an adage that I learned from a football coach that we use here on the show. You promote what you permit. So if I permit this melee at Michigan, Ohio State, and it becomes bigger and it triggers more melees like this, because it started with Baker Mayfield, and then it just kept going and going and going, and we're seeing more of that. You promote what you permit, Representative Williams. And I'm thinking, and I'm starting to see this. This is now leaking down to the high schools. It will leak down to the peewees, because we mimic what we see from the people that we emulate. So if you're an Ohio State fan and you're a Michigan fan and your kid's playing, what are you going to think when they do that at their high school? And they start doing that in Pee Wee football, because Representative Williams, you know that's coming.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that they're seeing this on TV, right? Our kids mimic what they see, right? They identify with their favorite sports stars and the way they behave, everything from the apparel that they wear to some of their actions at home plate when they step up to the plate ready to hit, the way they grab their gloves or get ready to swing. Kids emulate what they appreciate, and they emulate their superstars. And unfortunately, we're going to start seeing this continue. And like you said, in law, we say what is not prohibited is permitted. Anything that is not outlawed is lawful, right? And we want to see the NCAA and the Big Ten come out with policies, directives to the universities that outline what are going to be the penalties for this type of conduct. They have so much control. It could be everything from pulling scholarships from the universities. I mean, we lose scholarships over recruiting violations if you text a player past a certain date or a certain time, or if you have someone on an unauthorized visit. But we won't take away scholarships when you cause injuries to law enforcement officers because of unsportsmanlike conduct after the whistle blows. So we want to see policies come from the NCAA and the conferences that govern pregame and postgame unsportsmanlike conduct, very similar to during the game, you have regulations on unsportsmanlike conduct. I mean, if we target, you can be suspended for the next game. If you engage in unsportsmanlike conduct on a repeated basis, you can be suspended for the next game. But if you engage in fighting after the game, don't worry, you're going to be playing in your next bowl game, but we're going to fine your school $100,000, and they're going to host a brunch where, you know, their boosters come together and laugh as they cut a check to cover this fine. And that's unfortunate, and it shouldn't be allowed. And I pray that the attention that this bill gets will make the NCAA and the Big Ten reevaluate their policies.
State Representative Josh Williams from the great state of Ohio joining us here on the Infinity Sports Network. Just a couple more questions, if you don't mind. I kind of look at this and I have a better understanding now. And like I said, I normally, I'll be honest with you, Representative, I probably would have made fun of you for about an hour and a half on the radio. But I have a rule. I'm never going to say anything on the radio that I won't say to your face. So I said, well, if I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about Josh Williams of Toledo, Ohio, I'm going to say it to the man's face. And then when I started doing a little bit more research, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I think I kind of align with him because you promote what you permit. And I saw last weekend in California, flags thrown before a CIF football game because the kids are emulating, mimicking what they do in the college level, and it's going to keep going and going and going if we don't stop. My question is, have you had anybody that actually took the time to listen to what you were trying to accomplish, the bully pulpit that you have that's gone viral? Have you had anybody call up coaches-wise, youth sports-wise, college-wise, going, you know what, Representative Williams, I think you're onto something here?
Yeah, so other than reporters like ESPN, calling to give me the time to explain my conduct, some of my former football coaches actually called me up. So I coached youth football for 15 years in the city of Toledo. So some of my coaches know how I conduct myself on the field, and the fact I used to suspend players. I suspended one player for 2 games for flipping into the end zone when he scored a touchdown. That type of conduct wasn't permitted on the teams that I coached on and I ran for 15 years in the city of Toledo. So I did have some of my coaches that actually coached with me over those years give me a call and be like, all right, coach, what were you thinking when you introduced this? And one of them actually called and said, I know exactly what you were going for, man. You hated to see that unsportsmanlike conduct. And that was refreshing to hear from some of those guys I've known for decades and coached with, battle with, and shook hands at the end of every game. Our kids had to cross that center line at the 50-yard line and shake hands with their opponents. And we never had any melees. We never had any fights, because the core principle for us in youth sports was we were using sports as a way to build character in young men and young women. And that needs to carry on into college football.
I do have to ask you this, just because we're going to be fair and candid and transparent. I helped coach. I was a get-back coach at Cathedral Catholic High School in San Diego, one of the best high school football teams in California, and one of my jobs was to make sure that I kept the coaches from going on the field, because you lose your mind sometimes when you're coaching. And then I if anything broke out between the players, I would go break it up, and I'd walk with our kids when they shake hands after the game. And there are times where I'd have to talk to kids, hey, you know what, we don't need that. You don't need to be saying anything. Game is over. Let's move on. I have to imagine as many people have kind of misinterpreted what you're doing here. How much grief have you gotten? How many people have called up to say, hey, Representative Josh Williams, you've got more important things to do. Keep your nose out of college football.
Yeah, I've had thousands of those calls and emails come to my office, and all it takes is a quick Google of me, and you'll see I'm the number 1 Republican in the State House when it comes to bills that are sponsored and co-sponsored. I'm the number 2 Republican in the entire state legislature when it comes to bills that are sponsored and co-sponsored. I'm a hardworking legislator that's well respected by his colleagues. I've introduced over 40 bills. I've written over 50 bills just in my first 2 years in the legislature. So as I told one person that commented on my Facebook, I said I can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I'm able to handle some very important issues, everything from increasing penalties for gun violence in our communities to making sure spousal rape exception was eliminated here in the state of Ohio to providing funding to our communities. I'm a hardworking legislator, but at the same time, when I see an issue and I see an opportunity to kind of grab national headlines to try to redirect it towards what was important, which is that this melee resulted in the injury to a law enforcement officer, and we need to prevent this in the future. Even if I have to be, ridiculed online, I don't mind. I got thick skin. I know what the intention of the bill was, and I know that the NCAA and the Big Ten heard me loud and clear because they've responded already about evaluating pregame and postgame unsportsmanlike conduct. And hopefully it moves the needle. And if it does, if policies come out of the NCAA and the Big Ten, all the ridicule was worth it because I was able to move the needle and provide safety and security on our college campuses.
I would just suggest, I would ask passionately as someone who gets to talk to sports fans around the country every weekend, as we move forward, I think it's important that we also add to your bully pulpit message that we're setting a tone. You coached Pee Wee football because you wanted to keep kids out of trouble. You wanted, I'm assuming, keep kids out of trouble. You wanted to give them opportunities. I know my son played youth sports because I wanted him to learn how to lose. And I wanted him to learn how to pick himself up after he got knocked on his rear end. I wanted him to learn what it's like to challenge himself. I wanted him to learn how to succeed, but I wanted him to learn life lessons in this. And I think in today's day and age with NIL and the portal, everybody wants to look at college football. The one thing, Representative Williams, I have not talked a lot about on this program in years and years and years is sportsmanship, unless it's Army-Navy Day. It's ironic that you're coming on with this day. I hope that there's more conversation. I appreciate the law enforcement officer that was injured, but I hope people understand that we promote what we permit, and if we don't stand up and say this is wrong and all come out and say something and just kind of let it go, it's just going to keep getting worse.
Yeah, I think it's very important. You know, when I was a youth football coach, on the back of my jerseys were not my kid's last name. Instead, it was 25 character traits spread out amongst my 125 football players. Everything from dedication and service to honesty and integrity were all on the back of their jerseys, one at a time. And my league loved that idea. And I used to penalize my players for not for messing up on plays, but if they were being dishonest and they had that on the back of their jersey, I held them to those 25 character traits, and they will be punished more harshly for violating those character traits than they would for messing up on a play or getting offsides or a holding penalty. Character is what sports is supposed to build. Rivalries are there for entertainment alone, and entertainment should not trump the safety of our citizens, of our student athletes, and of our law enforcement officers. Just imagine if one of our superstars would have been severely injured that day going into the football playoffs and unable to play, and we lose the game because of that substantial injury. Imagine one of our fans would have been really hurt that day and in the hospital. Imagine one of our law enforcement officers would have suffered a more serious injury than just a severe concussion. You know, we would be having a different conversation. And my job is to always try to prevent harm to the people that are either living or visiting my state.
So let me make sure one last thing before I let you go, and you've been so kind with your time today. I really appreciate it. I have that rule that I'm never going to say anything behind your back that I wouldn't say to your face. I'm never going to run my mouth to the radio that I wouldn't say to someone's face. So when we're arranging to have the interview and have you come on with us, because I know you're not doing that much media right now, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that you want to get across that we didn't talk about?
The bill is called the O.H.I.O. Sportsmanship Act. Got to give a shout out to my Buckeyes.
There you go. I like it. Can we keep in touch? And as this goes on, I'd love to hear when you get a chance to talk to Ryan Day, what that reaction is. I'd love to hear what the athletic director has to say to your face when you sit down and talk to him after your lame duck session. I'd love to hear what the governor has to say. I'd love to hear what other politicians and elected officials have to say around the country. And I look at you as a man who had great intentions, and I think some cynicism has kind of hijacked the message that you're trying to get across, and I'm glad that we got a chance to sit and talk about it.
Yeah, one final message is, watching those videos and what happened afterwards, I was truly disappointed in the two head coaches. One, the Michigan coach simulating the flag planting at the basketball game, showing that we didn't take it serious. But I was even more disappointed in Ryan Day, not because of the loss, but because he had a player standing next to him who ran into fight and he froze. That's not leadership. I'm not saying that our head coach should have got in there and thrown punches and kicks. What he should have did was ran in there and yelled at his players to get to the locker room, trying to prevent this melee from happening or escalating. And in that period of time, he showed a lack of leadership that was truly disappointing to me as both an elected official and as a fan.
State Representative Josh Willimas from Ohio has been our special guest and exclusive interview here on the Infinity Sports Network. Thank you so much. Best of luck to your Buckeyes as you head into the college football playoffs. And like I said, I'd love to be able to continue this conversation as your bill generates more interest, talk, and hopefully goes viable for the right reasons.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. We'll continue with you. This is the Infinity Sports Network.